A decision that changed everything. Part 1, The Beginning. I was 18 when I met Alex. I had just graduated from high school, uncertain about what the future would hold. I thought I had the whole world at my feet, ready to embark on an adventure that would shape the rest of my life. What I didn't expect was that my world would be turned upside down by someone I barely knew. Alex was older, confident, and seemed to have everything together. He had a steady job, a car, and a charm that could disarm anyone. We met at a friend's party one summer night, and from the moment our eyes locked, something clicked. It wasn't love at first sight, but there was an undeniable connection. At first, it was innocent enough: texts, late-night phone calls, and weekend hangouts. But Alex made me feel seen, in a way no one else had. He told me I was beautiful, smart, and capable of anything. He made me feel important, as though I mattered more than anyone else in his life. In his presence, I felt a sense of security, something I had longed for since childhood. Within a few weeks, Alex was in my life almost every day. We did everything together: movies, dinners, walks on the beach. The more I was with him, the more I began to believe that maybe he was my person. He would often talk about our future, about how we could build a life together. He was always so sure about us, and in my naive youth, I admired that confidence. 3 months after we met, Alex proposed. It was sudden, overwhelming, and, looking back, completely irrational. I hadn't even been able to fully process who Alex was, yet I said yes. The idea of forever with someone who made me feel like the center of their world felt intoxicating. In those 3 months, I didn't see the cracks. I didn't see the small controlling behaviors that would later manifest into something much darker. I didn't notice the subtle manipulations, the way he made me doubt myself or question my friends and family. I thought love would be enough to fix everything. But at 18, I had no idea what real love, or a healthy relationship, looked like. We were married 3 months later in a small ceremony at a local church. It wasn't grand, but it was everything I thought I wanted. My family was supportive, my friends were excited, and Alex seemed like the perfect man. We were going to build a life together, one filled with dreams and promises. Part 2, The Middle. It didn't take long for things to change. The first few months of marriage were like a honeymoon, filled with love and excitement. But it wasn't long before the mask started to slip. Alex became more possessive, more demanding. He began to question my choices, my friends, even the way I dressed. His compliments turned into criticisms. "Why are you talking to him? You don't need to wear that, it makes you look cheap." I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he was just worried. After all, he had always seemed so protective. But the questions turned into arguments, and the arguments turned into control. I had no idea that what I had perceived as love was actually a toxic, possessive grip that Alex had placed on me. I stopped hanging out with friends, stopped talking to family, and isolated myself in ways I couldn't understand. Alex told me that he was only doing it because he loved me and wanted to protect me from the world that would hurt me. I believed him. How could I not? He had been so convincing in the beginning. As time passed, the little things started to feel more suffocating. I couldn't go to the grocery store without him calling me 5 times. I couldn't hang out with a friend without him making me feel guilty for not spending time with him. And yet, when I tried to confront him, he always turned it around. "You're overreacting," he'd say, or, "I'm just concerned for you." Eventually, I stopped standing up for myself. I didn't know how to. By the time we celebrated our first anniversary, I was no longer the bright, hopeful young woman I had been. I was a shell of the person I once was, afraid to speak up, afraid to do anything that might upset him. I had lost touch with the people who cared about me, and I had become entirely dependent on Alex for my sense of worth. I believed, in the depths of my heart, that if I could just make him happy, everything would be okay. But nothing was ever enough. I had dreams before I met Alex, dreams of going to college, traveling, finding my own identity. But those dreams had been silenced, replaced with the constant anxiety of wondering if I was doing everything right, if I was enough for him. I had become someone I didn't recognize. And yet, I stayed. I told myself that things would get better. After all, this was marriage. I had made a commitment. I couldn't just walk away. But every day, the weight of my decision grew heavier. Part 3, the ending. It took 2 years of constant emotional strain before I realized what had happened. I had lost myself completely in this relationship. I had become so entangled in Alex's world that I couldn't even see my own anymore. I was no longer the vibrant 18-year-old who had dreamed of a bright future. I was a woman drowning in someone else's expectations. The breaking point came one evening when Alex snapped at me over something trivial. He had always been temperamental, but this time, something inside me snapped. I stood there, trembling, as he shouted at me for not cooking dinner exactly the way he liked. Something inside me broke, and I realized, this wasn't love. This wasn't the future I had envisioned. For the first time in 2 years, I found the courage to leave. It wasn't easy. The thought of walking away from everything I had known, from the man I had once loved, terrified me. But I had to. I had to find myself again, to rediscover who I was before Alex had consumed every part of me. Leaving wasn't simple. Alex begged me to stay, promised that he would change, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. He had promised so many times before, and each time, he had failed. I packed my things and walked out of that house, leaving behind the life I had once dreamed of. It felt like an eternity, but I knew it was the only way forward. The divorce wasn't easy. It was messy, painful, and filled with the kind of emotional battles that seemed endless. But as I moved through the process, I began to heal. Slowly, I started to reconnect with my family, to rebuild the relationships I had lost. I found strength in the people who truly cared about me, who never stopped loving me, even when I couldn't see it myself. In time, I returned to school, started a new career, and rediscovered the passions I had buried. It wasn't an easy road, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Looking back, I realized that my decision to marry Alex had been the worst mistake of my life. But it had also been the catalyst for my greatest transformation. I had fallen in love at 18, and in those first months of excitement, I had thought I was making the right choice. But sometimes, love isn't enough to make a relationship work, especially when one person is willing to sacrifice the happiness of the other for their own control. I learned the hard way that love shouldn't make you lose yourself, it should help you find who you truly are. And in the end, I found that the most important relationship I needed to nurture was the one with myself. Part 4, the aftermath. The months that followed were a blur of emotions, grief, guilt, anger, and, strangely, relief. At first, I struggled to find any sense of normalcy. I had lived with Alex for 2 years, and now, I was suddenly alone. The silence of my apartment was both comforting and unnerving. There were moments when I would catch myself thinking about him, wondering if he was okay, if he regretted what had happened. But I quickly realized that those thoughts were a trap, a reminder of the emotional hold he had once had on me. I started therapy shortly after moving out. At first, it felt like an obligation, something I had to do to prove I was okay, to reassure myself that I had made the right choice. But as I began to open up, to unravel the layers of emotional abuse I had endured, I started to understand how much I had been manipulated. My therapist helped me recognize the signs of emotional control, the subtle ways Alex had chipped away at my self-worth, until I was nothing more than a reflection of what he wanted me to be. The realization was painful, but it was also freeing. I also began to reconnect with old friends, people I had pushed away in my marriage. They welcomed me back with open arms, no questions asked. The guilt I had felt about abandoning them started to fade as I realized how important these relationships had been before I let Alex take priority over everything in my life. I learned that true friends would always support me, even when I made mistakes. One evening, I bumped into Sarah at a coffee shop, a friend from high school whom I hadn't seen in years. She was the first person who didn't judge me for what had happened. She listened to my story without interrupting, without offering unsolicited advice. Instead, she simply said, "I'm proud of you for leaving." You deserve so much more than what he gave you." Her words, so simple and sincere, were a balm for my bruised soul. I realized then that I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. I had done the right thing by walking away. Part 5, Rediscovering Myself. A year passed before I felt ready to start dating again. It wasn't that I wanted to rush into another relationship, it was more that I wanted to prove to myself that I could be loved, that I could trust someone again. But the idea of opening up to someone new was terrifying. The scars from my marriage still stung. The thought of being vulnerable again, of letting someone into my life, felt impossible. But with time, I started to change. I found joy in small things, the scent of fresh flowers, the feeling of the sun on my skin, the freedom to make my own decisions without fear of judgment. I took up hobbies I had abandoned, like painting and writing. I traveled to places I had always dreamed of visiting. For the first time in my life, I was truly living for myself, and it felt amazing. One weekend, while attending a friend's birthday party, I met Jason. He was funny, kind, and easy to talk to. We bonded over our love of books and music, and he was patient. Never rushing me into anything, never expecting too much. He respected my space and boundaries, and that alone was enough to make me feel safe. We began to see each other more regularly, and gradually, I started to trust him. He never pressured me, never tried to change me. He simply accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to be loved without fear. I realized that I didn't need to be perfect for someone else to love me, I just needed to be myself. Jason never tried to control me, never made me doubt my worth. Our relationship was built on respect, trust, and communication. It wasn't perfect, but it was healthy. And for me, that was enough. Part 6, A New Beginning. A year and a half after I left Alex, I stood in front of a mirror, looking at the woman who had emerged from the wreckage of her past. I was no longer the insecure, afraid girl I had been when I married Alex. I had grown stronger, more confident, and more self-aware. I had faced my fears, learned from my mistakes, and rediscovered the woman I had lost. Alex reached out to me once, a few months after the divorce was finalized. He apologized, told me he had changed, that he missed me. For a moment, I considered replying, maybe even meeting him, just to hear his side. But as I sat with the thought, I realized that I had no desire to go back to that life. The man who had once seemed like my everything was now nothing more than a memory, one I was finally ready to leave behind. I deleted his number and never looked back. The past was the past, and I had no intention of letting it dictate my future. I spent the next few years building a life that was truly mine. One that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or validation. I pursued my career, traveled more, and continued to grow in ways I never thought possible. I learned to embrace the things I had once been afraid of, loneliness, independence, and the unknown. And then, one summer evening, as I stood on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized that I had found peace. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had faced my darkest moments and come out stronger on the other side. I had fallen in love at 18 and made a decision that had changed my life. But in the end, it wasn't the worst decision I had ever made. It was the beginning of a journey that led me to myself. And that, in the end, was the best decision of my life.